mean, I had the KGB break into my office in Switzerland, steal my hard drive, and a year later I found myself skiing behind a man who had a handcuff attached to a suitcase. And you realize that he was the colonel with the nuclear codes skiing about 10 meters behind the president of Russia. And when we got to the bottom of the run, sort of spoke to the assistant. I said, look, guys, now you've won. This was for Sochi. Now you've won. Can I have my hard drive back?
Welcome to Wait What? Sports Biz Chat with DP and McGhee, the podcast where we take a sometimes irreverent, sometimes cynical, and yes, even a sometimes serious look at the business of sports. I'm your co-host, Tim McGhee.
And I'm David Parro.
David, I apologize for rushing the introduction, but we were talking about so much good stuff, I didn't want to lose it by having you to cut it out. So what's on your mind today?
Yeah, there's so much going on, and we have a very exciting guest coming up as well that it's going to be pretty loaded. So we're going to have to move through things, I think, fairly quickly. So much going on. I'm not going out on a limb if I were to say we live in very strange times. I think we recognize that. But last week we had two major things going on in the world of football, soccer. That being, of course, the MLS Cup final from South Florida, and of course the World Cup draw, the FIFA World Cup draw for the 2026 FIFA World Cup, taking place at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. And never have I seen something where the MLS Cup looked to be the traditional international thing, a U.S.-based league, whereas FIFA World Cup draw just looking like a bad Vegas show. And I will go further out on a limb, or maybe not so far out, by saying that was the worst thing I've ever watched on television. I don't think I've ever seen anything as stupid. And I think I got dumber with every second that went on before they drew. But then when they started drawing, to have to hear Wayne Gretzky try to pronounce country names. Now, if he'd listened to Wait What, he would know that North Macedonia is pronounced like that, because that's one of the countries that dominate.
Curacao. It's not that tough. It's really not that hard.
He is clearly the GOAT, right? I mean, I don't think we can deny that, his greatness as a hockey player, but I don't think anyone has ever put him up in any sort of.
I don't know. He might be the dolt at this time. At this point, the dolt of all time.
But
I mean, even there are Canadians I know who are going, listen, we don't know this guy.
Well, everything about the show, and that was just one point. We're picking on Wayne Gretzky.
Let's pick on Tom Brady at the same time, or Shaquille O'Neal. They couldn't open a.
I don't know.
He can clone a dog. He can clone a dog, but he can't open a ball with a country name in it.
Everyone else had no problem with it. Wayne Gretzky did a very good job of opening his things. Listen,
it was after he opened them that he had the issue.
Aaron Judge walked on the stage. That was the only cool thing on the thing when Aaron Judge walked on. It's like, I think I wrote you right at that time. I'm like, Aaron Judge is such a badass. I was watching Aaron Judge. I just had the sense he was going, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
It was like, Stockdale when he was the vice president candidate for.
Who am I? What am I doing here?
Ross Perot. Like nothing. And then we haven't even talked about the made-up Peace Prize that they decided to do. But the whole show was an audience of one. We know that, and we get it. And we'll talk to our guest that's coming up about that, because I think it's a funny thing. But the entire show, no one, all of those delegates in that audience that were there, because this is important business to the world of sport, right? Were so miserable. There was Kevin Hart, a very funny guy.
Not on that show.
And Robbie Williams and Nicole Scherzinger, excuse me. Tony Award winning Nicole Scherzinger, amazing in.
I met her when she was in the Pussycat Dolls.
You said that before, which is
met
amazing.
All the Pussycat Dolls.
I saw her in Sunset Boulevard. She's freaking amazing. And
Yeah.
Robbie Williams, I think, is a great singer. He was all pissed off when he walked off the stage.
Well, I was going to say there's a lot of agents who were getting called. Like Aaron Judge probably called his agent. Robbie Williams probably called his agent afterwards, saying, "What the hell did you?" Kevin Hart will go to opening of an envelope if he gets paid.
He does do too much. I like him, and I just happened to watch Get Hard recently, and I'm like, he's good in that. He's really funny in that with Will Ferrell. I felt like it was important to watch, and so I did, and I hated myself for it.
80 minutes, I think, 80 or 88 minutes before they actually got to the draw. I had this conversation with a past guest. I'm not going to say who it is because they are still involved in the world of FIFA. But my contention is, and this person did not disagree with me, that Infantino is simply holding the tiger by the tail until the day after the match at MetLife Stadium. And that is why he had the Village people playing. The Village people.
The Village people was, I'm guessing they had a track behind him, but the lead singer was still singing the stuff live, but he missed the entire first verse. That whole production was, you'd think that would be the one thing that they nailed. It was
They're
the end
104
of the show.
years old. They're so old, Keith Richards calls them sir. I mean, and then that Peace Prize. I guess he had a choice, right? He could have either gotten the Peace Prize or he could have got a Mayor McCheese doll with the Happy Meal. He chose the Peace Prize.
It is too bad that we are in this time, because it really should have been a coming together with the North America leaders, Carney obviously there, and the Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico, there as well. But it couldn't be, right? Like, because we just don't live in that time. It was a very different show.
Listen, if we lose listeners because of what I'm about to say, I apologize to you, David, but I don't apologize for what I'm about to say. It saddens me greatly that this administration is going to be in office for both the World Cup and the Olympic Games coming to this country. Because not only are those two amazing global sporting events, we, in the past, have used those types of events to demonstrate the greatness of America. And I just don't think we're capable of doing that at this time in our history. And that saddens me deeply. Yeah,
back to your point about Infantino, holding the tiger by the tail here. There are certainly reasons he needs to do that.
Of course.
Not the least of which, of course, is the threat of moving venues, which would be catastrophic, I think.
And every day gets more and more catastrophic.
Yes, of course, as we get closer. I want to go back to the original point I was making, which was the contrast between MLS Cup. I think Trump said 1 billion people watched that show. That's not true. But it was the global audience is probably in the 500 million area until everybody either passed out or decided they couldn't watch anymore. So the numbers are huge, and I'm not comparing that to an MLS Cup final. But you had arguably the greatest player ever in Lionel Messi playing in an MLS Cup and winning 3-1 against the Vancouver Whitecaps, and the show was good. I didn't get to watch all of the match. I did take in the close, and Don Garber did what you're supposed to do in that moment and made it about the ownership, the team, and the fans. And I thought that celebration was like a great soccer moment should be. A couple other things that I think came out in advance of MLS Cup. Don Garber in his address mentioned that the average age of new international players, I think this is somewhat significant, is just 24, which is a movement down to younger international players coming rather than the people that are somewhat past their prime when they come over to play in MLS. So I thought that was a good sign. Anyway, I just was struck by these things happening in the United States around this sport and just how different they are and how odd it was, because one was the U.S. product and the other supposedly was the international FIFA product.
Yeah, another thing that Commissioner Garber said, not in his interview on Fox, but earlier in the week, was that he did not fully discount the idea of promotion and relegation within Major League Soccer, which is absolutely huge. I have been around MLS long enough to remember when he said it would not happen. I've been around long enough when he said, it's not something that's being discussed. And now it seems like this MLS 3.0 that they're talking about might include that. I think it has a lot to do with the continued development of USL, and more importantly, the continued development of facilities that would be sufficient for a first division club. But I've always said in the past, and one of the biggest arguments against promotion and relegation in Major League Soccer is the amount of money that's been invested by the owners. My contention has always been, let's provide some sort of financial backstop to the owners. We'll take the average revenue, profit, whatever measure you want to use for the rest of the league, and we will make you whole. So if you get relegated to the second division, we will backstop you for 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, whatever it is, and we will make sure that you're whole with the average revenue. But after that, you're on your own, right? Then you've got to succeed or fail on your own merits as an organization.
Yeah.
But there are ways to ease that transition to a system of promotion or relegation.
Don Garber doesn't come out and say that without having had discussions with his ownership group, right? Which is a pretty tight ownership group, not as tight as it was originally when it was just a few people. But the U.S. sports model has never supported this idea. But with these owners now having global interests, seeing what that could mean, maybe there is an evolution there. I still don't necessarily think it's happening right away. We had one of our social posts that got a tremendous amount of engagement. So we know people that like this sport are tuned into this idea of pro-rel. So I love the fact that it's a discussion. I just love the fact that it's even in the mix potentially, because for us, it's great because it's something we can discuss. But I do think that it suggests that is another point in moving them along this progression into being considered a more serious league on the global set.
Yeah, I want to say one more thing before we get off the topic of MLS, or two more things, actually. Number one, the match wasn't particularly well played. It was a pretty chippy affair. But I do think that the best team won at the end.
Statistically, Vancouver actually, time of possession and shots and stuff. I think
they had that one.
Yeah.
They had that one. I don't know if you saw it, where at one point they hit the post 3 times in succession, and that changed the outcome of the match right there. But Inter Miami is a very good team. They peaked at the right time. That's number one. Sebastian Berhalter. I'm going to say 3 things. Number 2, Sebastian Berhalter is a player to watch.
Yeah.
Going into the World Cup. I'm going to say 4 things. The third thing is, you ever notice every soccer coach looks the same? Like both the Inter Miami and the Vancouver Whitecaps, tall, thin, balding white guys. Then they go to Greg Berhalter, sitting in the Chicago Fire coach, sitting in the stands watching his son play. Tall, bald, white guy. Pochettino, Paul. They all look exactly alike. It's like it's like Johnny Bravo. The suit's got to fit if you want to get the job. And the last thing I'll say, on a serious note, is the one thing you never hear in soccer are owners coming out criticizing Don Garber. I've never heard that. It's really interesting. They've obviously Dolan and Adam Silver. There have been guys who have criticized Bettman and Manfred and even Goodell. I've never heard an owner speak out against Don Garber. It's fascinating to watch.
He runs a tight ship. I think they manage their comms quite well. And granted, he doesn't have the pressure or the ancillary storylines that a Goodell or an Adam Silver would, or Manfred for that matter. But still, agree with you.
He's had a guy by the name of Dan Courtemanche by his side for his entire tenure as commissioner. Dan has run communications for MLS and one of the greats in the industry.
Let's move on.
All right, I'm gonna throw you a curveball. Usually we discuss this beforehand, but I wanna throw a spotlight on sponsorship.
How do we feel about these sponsorship deals?
There's been a ton of stuff that's going on, and I figured We only have a few more minutes before our guest joins us, so instead of going an inch deep and a mile wide, I'm going to go an inch wide and a mile deep. All right, so first, your former employer is out, as we know, as the title sponsor of the Haas F1 team, but Toyota announced they're going to be coming in, getting back into the sport. I think that's pretty big news, and I know that you commented on it on LinkedIn. I saw that.
Just to be clear on that, yes, MoneyGram had a multi-year deal that they opted out of. So this was the last year. It was a pretty lame duck year, to be honest with you. And a partner that had come on the previous year as a support technical sponsor is actual Toyota Gazoo Racing. So it's their technical performance side, and they will now become the title partner of what will be TGR, Toyota Gazoo Racing Haas F1 team. It's a little bit more of a mouthful, I guess, but the relationship between team principal 𝘭𝘭𝘆𝘭𝘆 and Toyota has been strong. is Japanese, and that working relationship has been very productive, and now bringing them in as title is great. I feel good for everybody at Haas F1 team for not having to have a gap in that title sponsorship.
Yeah, you know better than most, right, how important it is to have that money flowing. A couple other ones. A company, I think it's pronounced Excesso Biologics, was announced to be the first ever jersey patch partner for college football. They're going to be on the jersey of UNLV. So I think that dam will burst. I think we will hear a ton more about that in the days and weeks and months ahead as more and more schools sell that jersey patch. I think there are going to be some schools that probably get NFL type money for that. Third thing I want to talk about is PayPal, something we've talked about on the show in the past, how Visa, one of the longest standing NFL sponsors, is out. American Express is back in, but the NFL in its infinite wisdom chopped up that category. They sold the bank category, which Visa had held, and now they're selling the electronic payment system, which Visa also held. So, it looks more and more like the NFL is going to make a lot more money from the financial services category writ large than they did just from had they renewed with Visa.
Yeah, it's an ongoing push and pull when it comes to sponsorship. Back in the day, when you were at AT&T, say I was at McDonald's, and you were looking to grab everything, and we hopefully will talk to our guest about stuff like that. When from a McDonald's side, we wanted everything, right? We wanted anything that you could put in your, people could eat, consume, would be something that we would consider part of the category. But then, properties got smart on that and started jacking up what that might mean. And then, brands have to make those decisions on what's important for them to protect. And in some ways, on the brand side, it's easier to defend a more finite area than everything, right? Because we all get it. We all end up getting caught in playing defense sometimes more than offense, and I don't think that's ever a good strategy personally, when you can't be totally out on the offensive with what it is that you're trying to communicate. But yeah, being able to carve that up, and industry changes, right? Things change, the way we consume things, the different offerings that there are in the financial services business is the epitome of that. I mean, we had that situation even with MoneyGram. I mean, everyone else in the business it wasn't necessarily a direct exact overlap, but there are going to be pieces of it that overlap because everybody wants to have, those kind of what we may call the fintech services today, that we're able to send money, directly over our phone. So that's going to be a piece of it. And you're going to want to have wallets. You're going to want to have a crypto representation. So all of these changes lead businesses and brands to have to assess what it is that's important, while at the same time properties looking to see how they want to optimize what their sponsorship revenue could be by splitting up those categories.
Yeah, when I look back to the time that I was working with USAA and we negotiated their first ever NFL deal, it was only for the insurance category, and they have wealth management and banking as two other key lines of business. We did not have rights to those categories, but what we found was because they did such an effective job activating that NFL sponsorship, primarily around the idea of military appreciation, we saw brand left awareness, consideration, willingness to recommend. All of those key brand metrics we saw going up in both the wealth management and the banking lines of business as well. So you don't necessarily, it used to be, like you were saying earlier, exclusivity was king, right? And you don't necessarily have to have all of the categories or even exclusivity in the categories. And you look at USAA, a few years after doing that deal, they even said, we don't need to be the exclusive insurance sponsor of the NFL, and Nationwide came in and took part of the category. So I think we've seen a lot of changes, my friend, since you and I started working in this business, right?
And we'll see more.
Yeah,
in the future.
No, well, listen, I worked, I sold sponsorships to the Last Supper, so I've been doing this a long time.
So before our guest joins us, I do, and maybe this is good that we have to keep this tight because I think we could go on forever. I just want to get your general take on the selection process for college football playoff, and particularly your view on Notre Dame getting left out and Notre Dame deciding to not play in a bowl game.
We've had this conversation before. If you have 12 teams in a playoff, teams 13 and beyond are going to be pissed, right? And that's what we saw this past weekend. I do think that Notre Dame had the biggest, most valid complaint. They didn't play, and they dropped through no fault of their own out of the playoffs. Alabama, after getting absolutely manhandled by Georgia in the SEC championship, gets in. And it's another loss. And I know that the selection committee says, well, we don't like to penalize people for their performance in the championship game. Why not? Why not? It's a win or no loss. It's the same thing. But, now I think the call is going to be for 16 teams. And if you're Vanderbilt or you're BYU or you're Notre Dame, and I'm trying to think who the other team, that Texas, they're going to. So there's your 16. So then number 17
is going to be, and we covered this, last year at the same time. It's like who is going to be in. Last year it was Florida State. And this year it's definitely Notre Dame. And I think I agree. They have the most legitimate beef. They did lose to Miami in the first game of the season, I believe, in a good game.
Yeah, it was a close game.
And so some people may say, why was Notre Dame even ahead of them? Well, that was because they were playing better by the standard. So it was a little weird how much pressure, the ACC put on the committee.
The ACC, it was an absolute joke.
It's an
absolute joke.
I've been saying that to some of I'm a Wake Forest guy, ACC school. I'm happy that Wake Forest is in the ACC. I don't have huge expectations every year. I was embarrassed by how bad they were this year. The fact that game the championship game was Duke, Virginia. Wake beat Virginia, lost to Duke, which probably threw the whole damn thing into this disarray. But they couldn't put their conference champion. They don't have someone in the conference championship that was good enough to be in the college football playoffs. But one school, Miami, that didn't make the championship. So listen, it is a little weird, but that didn't happen with any of the other conferences. Texas Tech ends up, being what they are. And obviously Indiana beating Ohio State in an unbelievable game and moving up to number one. Georgia, of course, taking the 3 spot by beating Alabama in the SEC championship and then still having multiple teams represented. So it's not going to get any better if they expand it, which I guess they will. But this bowl game situation and what the other bowl games mean is going to get less and less and less, and not just because Notre Dame says they're not going to play in one. I think they're catching a lot of, understandable and maybe deserved heat about if you're part of the process, which Notre Dame is. They're in the room, right? They're in the room where it happens when it comes to decisions and so forth, and they choose to be independent. It's their choice, and it's worked out monetarily for them. But if you are part of the system, that much a part of the system, and you don't get what you want, I understand them beefing. I totally understand them, being hacked off about it. But I think you go to the bowl game.
Yeah, listen, I think we could have a whole episode just on their decision not to go to the bowl game. I will say 2 things. Number one, and I promise it's only 2 things this time. Number one, what the ACC did to Notre Dame, I think, might cause irreparable harm between Notre Dame and the ACC. Notre Dame is committed to playing 5 games a year against ACC opponents. And number 2, I think if you want If Notre Dame continues to go this route, the independent route, which they're well within their rights to do, 𝘭𝘁𝘁𝗲𝗏 brought this up last week on his show, refuse to play them. Say, no, we're not going to play you. And then then force Notre Dame's hand to join a conference. I mean, the most logical one in the past would have been the Big Ten for geographical reasons. That's not necessarily the case now. Now maybe it's the ACC. The ACC's got 17 teams in it.
The point where they could have done it logically has passed, and their ability to schedule, the great schedule they always have been able to do, has gotten tougher, especially with all the conferences moving to a format where you have to play X amount of in-conference games now. So it's not getting any easier for them, and then their selection of what conference would be logical for them has gotten tougher. ACC would have been a logical one because they were playing all their Olympics sports were already playing in the ACC, and then they committed to that football game number of games, and now that's gone.
How much you want to bet Brett Yormark's on the phone to 𝘭𝘁𝘁𝗏𝗏𝗏? Hey,
Absolutely.
Come join us. Come join the Big 12. We love you. We'll have you. Come on.
Oh, no doubt.
Take a break?
Let's do it.
It's time for our guest.
I don't think it's an exaggeration to say our guest this week is one of the most consequential sports marketers of our time, having helped shape how fans consume, how brands engage with, and how broadcasters present two of the most important global properties, the Olympic Games and Formula One. Michael Payne is the ultimate global sports insider, having been in the room for so many significant developments in the sports industry, whether as director of marketing at the International Olympic Committee or as an advisor to legendary F1 owner Bernie Ecclestone. He is out with a new book, Fast Tracks and Dark Deals: How Sport Became Business and Business Became Sport. I have to tell you, it's loaded with stories and insights. So, Michael, welcome to Wait What?
Great to be with you. Look forward to the exchange.
Well, listen, we know this is not your first book. You've published two previously, as we understand, but this one seems to take a much broader and I'd say a more opinionated look at the business of sports. First of all, why was this book important to do, and why did you feel you had to just get all these things out?
Well, I started looking at how the whole international sports industry evolved. There have been a lot of books written on the history of the NFL, the history of the NBA, but frankly, there's been very little, if anything, written on how the international global sport business came about. Equally, nobody's written a biography of Mark McCormack, Horst Dassler, the legendary founders of the industry. And I was very fortunate to sort of join the industry in the mid-70s, which, if you like, was at the very beginning, and had for the next half century an incredible journey. And I thought, well, I worked with all of these legends, was there in a lot of the key moments. Why not tell the story? And it sort of evolved into both a sort of a history and an autobiography to make it more personal, to take the reader literally into the conference negotiating room.
I'd like to ask you about the title. Fast Tracks and Dark Deals almost sounds a little bit ominous.
It is.
So why the title? What, without giving away too much, and obviously with the length of this book, I think that's impossible given how long we'll be speaking to you. But why do you feel it expresses what it is you were trying to communicate in the book?
Well, it was a Wild West adventure back in the 70s and 80s. And, it continued. I mean, the story's in there. I mean, I had the KGB break into my office in Switzerland, steal my hard drive. And a year later, I found myself skiing behind a man who had a handcuff attached to a suitcase. And you realize that he was the colonel with the nuclear codes skiing about 10 meters behind the president of Russia. And when we got to the bottom of the run, sort of spoke to the assistant. I said, look, guys, now you've won. This was for Sochi. Now you've won. Can I have my hard drive back? Which caused a bit of laughter. You look at the deals. I mean, whether it was Samaranch effectively double-crossing North Korea in order to break the cycle of boycotts and to get China and the Soviet Union to come to the Olympic Games. Whether it was the negotiating with Bernie Ecclestone, fortunately on the same side, with putting together some of the legendary Formula One circuits. The early days was Wild West.
I'm going to make the first foray into our, intersection of, the lives that we've led in the sports marketing business. So you tell a great story in the book about my former employer, McDonald's Corporation. So I work very closely with Dean Barrett. And I want to let you tell it because I think it's great, but it has to do with the clean venue concept of the Olympics and the opening ceremonies at the Atlanta Summer Games. And I do want you to tell it from the importance of why you did what you had to do and the importance of doing that, because it was rather dramatic.
You mean breaking into a McDonald's restaurant and finding the supply power and pulling the plugs? Yeah. Firstly, the IOC operates what's called a clean venue policy, meaning there is no advertising inside the field of play. A lot of people don't realize this, and over the years I've won more than the odd bottle of wine in bets because they say, yes, there's advertising in all sport. And he said, no, at the Olympics there isn't. Look at the television picture. And they will look at the TV picture and go, it is different. I always realized it was different. Maybe I didn't appreciate why. And, initially it was because the IOC was, conservative and was going to be the last international organization to embrace sponsorship. And then fairly early on, we realized it was a key point of difference and began to protect and then ruthlessly protect any form of advertising migration into what was called the field of play that the spectator or the TV cameras could see. The build-up to the Atlanta Games was challenging. We had quite a lot of problems from technology to transport logistics, but finally got to the opening ceremony and sort of breathed a sigh of relief and thought, well, at least for the next couple of hours, I can sort of sit back and enjoy the ceremony. And as the Parade of Nations started, I suppose it must have been around about, Angola being, the sort of 7th or 8th nation, my telephone started to ring like mad, and sort of picked it up, and a very distressed executive on the phone saying, have you seen the TV images? Have you seen? It's a disaster. I said, no, I don't know what you're talking about. Well, go and look at it from this angle of the stadium and get yourself in front of a TV screen. And the way the organizers had run it, they had decided to march all of the athletes up a ramp and down a ramp, which, if you know anything about trying to sort of teach people to march, is not a good idea. But as the athletes got to the top of the ramp, beautifully framed at the magical moment as they came over the ridge, was this massive, great McDonald's arch on a extended, one of these sort of extended poles, 30, 40 meters into the air, that you see outside McDonald's restaurants. And this was at the McDonald's restaurant in the park, but it was front and center of the whole broadcast. And, basically I had to get it switched off fast. And I suppose it wasn't until about Cameroon had marched by that I'd been able to get one of my managers to break into the restaurant. She was howling that she was going to get arrested. And I said, well, we're all going to get arrested if we don't get this bloody sign turned off. And she succeeded in turning it off. And a couple of hours later, returning to the hospitality lounge, who do I bump into but all of the leadership at McDonald's? I think Dean Barrett, the chief marketing officer. And I went up to him and said, I'm terribly sorry that somebody had to break into your restaurant to turn the light off. You couldn't imagine. Somebody had left had left the sign on by accident and wound it up to its highest angle. And I mean, I know this could never have happened on purpose. And I smiled and they blushed.
Dean was an interesting character, of course, as you well know. And one of the things, I'm just going to give you this. You may have heard it. He may have said this to you before. But one of the things that he used to always say anytime we were talking about Olympic stuff was it used to just annoy him no end that, say, shoe or apparel manufacturers could appear because of governing body, relationships or whatnot. And his threat was always, I'm buying a shoe company. Back when it would have been easier for McDonald's, I'm just buying an apparel company and doing all kinds of
Well, it's what the
NGB
tobacco industry did
right.
in the 70s, and it's how I got involved in the sports marketing industry. When tobacco advertising was being banned, Marlboro went and created Marlboro leisure wear. One of my earlier stories was working with Silk Cut Tobacco, and they had created a company called Silk Cut Holidays. And we would use Silk Cut Holidays as the advertising backdrop. I'm not sure if Silk Cut ever sold a single holiday in their life, but for a period of time, it was a way that the tobacco industry was getting around the advertising.
One of the people that you praise quite often in your book is Peter Ueberroth, and David and I are both big fans of Peter Ueberroth and what he did for the sports industry. In fact, I teach a college course and do a little section on Peter Ueberroth and how he brought the Olympics in many ways into the postmodern era through his leadership of the LA 1984 games. How would you characterize his legacy as the leader of the watershed 1984 games? And specifically, how did the torch relay factor into that?
Peter Ueberroth is probably one of the three most important executives in the Olympic movement who effectively saved the games. You have to remember, before Los Angeles 84, most people were writing the Olympic movement's obituary. It had become too expensive after Montreal. You were caught up in the superpower of boycotts between the Soviet and the US. Many people were writing it was game over. And even Los Angeles, when they were bidding, they were bidding against Tehran. And Tehran had, as they sort of said, a management change at the top. And the Ayatollahs didn't fancy inviting all of the world to Tehran. So it was just left LA. And then there was a public vote, and the Americans said, we love the Olympics, but we're not going to pay for it. And I think it was like 94% against. So the outlook wasn't very encouraging. Ueberroth publicly is credited with having created the marketing sponsorship programs, which he did. But I think a far bigger legacy was not how he earned the money, but how he spent it. And he was able to deliver an incredible games without having to do capital infrastructure, and showing that with a prudent financial model, you could stage a great games. And that was a turning point for the Olympic movement. He also began to understand this, what I talk about in the book a lot, is the magical power of the Olympics, and in this case, the torch relay. And he saw the potential of how the torch relay could really turn the whole nation on. And personally, people ask me, what are my most, memorable Olympic moments? They're not actually from the field of play, breaking some world record. It's actually being out on the torch relay with these community heroes and the symbolism of just carrying this Olympic flame that was lit through ancient traditions back in Olympia. And that aspect of the heritage, the aspect of the brand, Peter really began to understand the potential of that and bringing it to the fore.
You have had the opportunity to work with and for three different IOC presidents. Two that I would consider, and welcome your feelings on this, but two that I would consider real giants in Juan Antonio Samaranch and Thomas Bach. How would you characterize kind of compare and contrast their leadership? And also, if you could, what are your hopes and expectations for 𝘭𝘭𝘆𝘂𝗏𝐿𝐵𝑟𝑒's leadership?
Well, firstly, I should say that each president of the IOC is very different. They adopt a different management focus, different priorities. When Samaranch took over the IOC, as I said, the organization was bankrupt. I mean, after he was elected in Moscow in 1980, he returned to the IOC headquarters, saw the state of the accounts, and seriously wondered whether there was any way to give the presidency back. He wanted to throw the towel in. I mean, thank God he didn't. Over the course of the next 20 years, with a few key IOC members, he turned the whole IOC and the Olympic movement round and handed it on to his successor, Jacques Rogge. He was a Belgian surgeon, an Olympian, not as visionary, and arguably for a period of time, things were stable. Nothing was really moving forward. When Thomas Bach became president, he reintroduced a whole new energy. We saw explosive growth in the revenues. We also saw a remarkable political poker game with the Japanese government, where through the COVID crisis, although the former Prime Minister Abe had been fully behind staging the games even through COVID, the rest of the politicians frankly decided that all the foreigners were going to be coming to Japan carrying Ebola and would wipe out the Japanese race. So they did everything they could to force the IOC to cancel the games. And the IOC said, you want to cancel? Get ready to write a very, very big check. Because the World Health Organization is saying that this can be staged with a health protocol and you can stage as safety games. And if I may, the hypocrisy of the Japanese politicians at this time, where they demanded that the Olympic venues be staged without spectators, which was a tragedy, and yet 1 mile away you had baseball or sumo wrestling packed with Japanese spectators. And the argument was, oh no, you can't catch COVID at baseball or sumo wrestling, but you could catch COVID watching athletics or swimming. I mean, it was hypocrisy of the highest order. But Bach stood them down. And he had been an Olympic athlete who was unable to participate in Moscow. His government wouldn't let him go. So this was very personal for him in protecting the right of the athletes to be able to have their moment, because maybe 70% of all the athletes only get one chance at the Olympics. There isn't a second. Both Samaranch and Bach were they were visionary leaders, and I think history will record them as great leaders. We now, after 12 years with Bach, turn to a new leader, 𝘭𝘭𝘆𝘂𝗏𝐿𝐵𝑟𝑒, Africa's most successful Olympian. I think she's got her hands full. She's called for a complete review of the whole purpose and mission. The first priority has got to be to successfully deliver the Milano Cortina Games, and that's not straightforward. Those are very complicated Olympic Games to deliver, the largest footprint of a Winter Games ever. And then I think once that's behind her, we'll see next year as she begins to identify exactly what her priorities are and which IOC members she is going to really sort of surround herself with in creating a sort of a kitchen cabinet to lead the IOC forward. I think the organization administration needs a reboot because it's become very big, very bureaucratic, and at the end of the day, you got to realign your sole focus as the games. Yes, you need to have best practice on environment, on all sorts of other important themes, but you're not going to solve the world's environment. Your job is to stage the Olympic Games. So I think there probably will be maybe a tightening of focus back to the games and the athlete.
We've been very fortunate on this show to have a few past guests who have been in the Olympic movement, most notably Rob Prazmark and Terence Burns, two people that you talk about quite a bit in your book. So two-part question. How was Rob Prazmark so critical to the sponsorship model of the Olympics? And then with regards to Terence, how important was he to the games and the Olympic movement as it relates to sponsors, broadcasters, and fans?
We love showing off our past guests, by the way, Michael, which is why
I get a credit in future shows.
Absolutely. Yes.
Both Prazmark and Burns were very important players on the Olympic journey. And, I try throughout the book to acknowledge, all of the different executives who played a key role. Prazmark was a brilliant salesman, and he sold the two deals that were the turning point of the top program. We were struggling with the top program. Many people thought it would never work, and that it was just gonna, just not come through. There were political reasons with the countries, but the marketplace, in part because there was no advertising in the venues, didn't understand how to make the sponsorship work. And when Rob brought on board Visa and 3M, those two companies who had no history of sports sponsorship, the way they approached it completely redefined the sponsorship model. And integrating the Olympic brand, Visa with its messaging, the Olympic game. If you're going to go to the Olympic Games, don't forget to take your Visa card, because the Olympics doesn't take American Express. Nobody's seen sponsorship being used like that. And so it was a wake-up call to the industry, and it was a saving point that ensured the top program didn't collapse. 3M and how they used it with internal engagement. So that was the turning points. Terence, he introduced the concept of brand management to the Olympics and really educated me and brought a marketing discipline. In the early days, if you'd used the word brand at the Olympics, you'd probably have been fired, because people think the Olympics, it's not a brand. We're a 1,000-year heritage, and we're not going to operate like a commercial brand. And the answer is correct. You're not going to operate like a commercial brand, but you do have to understand what is important, what has to be protected, what has to be enhanced. And for a period of time, Terence really helped raise the bar overall on marketing, on an engagement. And thankfully he is still a sought after executive by countries bidding, countries hosting, and sponsors, because you have to understand the brand. That's what it's all about. What is it that makes the Olympics special, different, magical? And I think at times, sometimes with the bureaucracy that has been growing with the size of the administration, the brand management piece has been lost.
You don't hold back on pointing out some people that you feel didn't necessarily do a great service to the world of sport. As an example, Jimmy Carter, who I think, because of his post-presidency and humanitarian efforts, people feel has been a great man, but you are tough on him for his boycott of the 1980 Moscow Games, for instance.
But I also then acknowledge that Carter himself went on to say that his decision to boycott the games was the worst decision of his presidency.
Right.
So, he accepted his mistake.
Yeah. We'll get to that topic in a little bit as well. But anyway, one person that you definitely don't hold back on, and this guy we all knew in the business because it was like we were reading David D'Alessandro, the former CEO of John Hancock's, quotes all the time about the abuse and so forth going on within the Olympic movement. He definitely made himself very front and center. You're very tough on him. I just want to get your, kind of give you the opportunity. Like, why was what he was doing so counterproductive to everything he said he was trying to do?
Well, this is complicated, but the IOC went through a crisis and a very difficult time surrounding coming off the Salt Lake Games and the corruption surrounding Salt Lake. And the IOC had to effectively transform itself. There was a period of time where you would go into the office each day and not know if the IOC would survive the day after day. To transform a global organization across 200 countries is not something that can be done overnight. It's not easy to do in the spotlight of the media. And having one of your partners take a can of petrol and throw it on the fire was not helpful. And we tried to say to David, look, give us a break. Let us work through this. All of the other partners said to him, please give us a break. Let us try and work through this. NBC, Dick Ebersol, eventually lost his patience because what it came across as, D'Alessandro started to love the sound of his own voice and the media profile that this was giving him. To his credit, when the reforms were complete, he was then the first to re-sign, which sent a very strong message to the media. But, the old expression, don't throw stones in a glass house. And, a few months later, it turned out that, David and John Hancock had far bigger scandals in their own cupboard and, had to then deal with that.
After your time at the IOC, you went to another global property, Formula One, where you worked side by side with, I think, someone who can be accurately described as a polarizing figure, somebody who, while not maybe courting controversy seemed to find him from time to time, namely Bernie Ecclestone, who ran Formula One for nearly 40 years. How do you think Bernie should be remembered in the sports industry?
Absolute legend. I mean, he created Formula One. Before it was a dysfunctional, group of hobby motorists, sort of running around on a circuit. He understood the power of television. I mean, he was a phenomenal visionary leader, probably by far the best commercial negotiator I've come across. And he built Formula One single-handedly and sold it and then bought it back and sold it again and bought it back and made a few billions along the way. And, to this day, still at 94, is a visionary, powerful business leader. But he does have he does have a colorful relationship with the media, not least because he doesn't employ a single PR executive or minder, which means that he says what he thinks. And even if that may be true, when it's taken out of context, he is then in deep trouble. And, would normally complain, well, I didn't see the microphones because my hair was too long, or some other colorful remark.
Michael, while not covered in the book, we assume that you follow what's going on in the world of sport today. And I was curious, given that we're just coming off of the 2026 FIFA World Cup Draw event, and we talked about that in the upfront part of the show, I am curious as to your thoughts as to how Gianni Infantino is handling what is not an easy thing to handle in President Trump. What are your thoughts on how that's going to ultimately play out and what we might expect once World Cup ends?
Well, the US is in a unique situation at the moment, hosting the 26 World Cup and then the 28 Olympic Games, and shall we say, having a leadership that is quite high profile and volatile and engaging. But whether you agree with Trump's politics or disagree with him, if you're staging the World Cup or the Olympics in America, you want the head of state to be actively, fully engaged and supportive. And I would have wished we'd had that level of support for the '96 Atlanta Games. You need Washington's full engagement. So I think Infantino is playing it correctly in engaging with Trump and getting him involved. Now, did he have to award a peace trophy? I mean, I think, that frankly was somewhat, in football terms, an own goal, because it just plays into the hand of the media and that they will hold it up as being excessive. I think you could have maintained your close relationship with Trump, his full engagement and commitment to the World Cup. And it'll be great for him, for the president, on the world stage. And I think we'll be fully committed through to supporting the Olympics. Now, does the foreign policy and the swings and roundabouts of the foreign policy, make life a little bit more complicated in the countdown to the World Cup and the Games, particularly the Olympics? Yes. But the actual support for the operations, I think, is positive. And it's the job of the leadership to build a close rapport.
In the closing section of your book, you look into the future and leave your readers with a lot of things to think about. We don't want to give anything away, but what do you see as the things that will most shape sports in the future? And specifically, what role do you see sponsors and sponsorships having?
Well, the book, I take you on this journey over 50 years through the history, and then we get to the end and I say, right, what is the next 50 years going to look like? And come forward with, some fairly provocative observations, not suggesting this will happen, but to really get people talking and thinking. And frankly, when you start getting into it, never mind 50 years, quite a lot of it could happen within the next 10 to 20. Much of it gets driven by technology in the way that technology is impacting every industry. So what will be the role of AI from coaching into venues? What will be the future direction of governance? How will broadcasting evolve? If you look at doping, frankly, I think we're currently in the prehistoric era in terms of what's coming down. How far are we away from the day where every athlete's got to walk through a metal detector because of technology is implanted inside the body? So the challenge, and I think the balancing act for the leadership, is how do you embrace this technology to service and support the sport, to allow for a greater engagement with the fan and the consumer? But equally, how do you make sure that sport doesn't lose its soul by, letting technology, take over? And that's going to be a debate. At what stage does all refereeing, become AI drones? At what stage you want fair sport, but at what stage you're going to lose something, critical for the fan?
Did you want to go into more detail on the role of sponsorship particularly evolving?
Well, sponsorship is evolving rapidly with the power of data and digital, the speed of change in the marketplace. And that's a challenge for some of the properties because they're dealing with long-term deals, and the life of a top marketing director may only be 3-4 years in an organization. Companies continually changing their perspective and policy. So how does the relationship between the sponsor and the sports property evolve? The core is incredibly strong and powerful. People care about sport. And if the sponsor can be a facilitator in allowing the fan to have a greater engagement, a greater experience, being able to participate through in the content, the whole digital data era opens up many opportunities, but it's very different. And I think one of the biggest challenges facing the IOC is, the top program is now, more than 40 years old, most successful sports marketing, if not marketing program ever. It's got to change. It's got to evolve. And it's got to do that quite quickly.
We appreciate all the time that you spent. We do have 2 closing questions that we like to ask every guest. We didn't include your athlete background in your intro because we wanted you to be able to tell this story. Because the first question, Michael, that we have for you is,
where'd your career get started? Where'd you start it?
Very simply, I was a failed ski racer. And once I realized that I was spending more time in hospital than I was doing downhill, I decided to change to something much safer, which was called hot dogging or freestyle skiing. But that was professional at the time. So you had to go and find sponsors to pay for your hotel or your plane ticket. And I fairly quickly learned I was doing a much better job at finding sponsors than I was at winning any of the competitions. So I jumped into an industry as it was just starting.
Final question is, what's a piece of advice that you would give someone today looking to break into the sports business?
Well, the opportunities and breadth of sort of career development and opportunities is far, far greater than when I joined. I think, there's a lot of degrees out there that have a sports management bent. But I think if you're wanting to, work in the sports world, the more internships you can get, the more volunteering to work for the big events, with the World Cup and the Olympics in the States, sign up and be a volunteer. I mean, to have that experience, to get it on the CV, and then circle around, whether it's working with the teams, with the venues, particularly the thinking coming forward on data, on technology, everything, from even cybersecurity now. The sports world is at the forefront of so many areas that you can touch. So just getting early experience.
Michael, we can't thank you enough. It's been great to get to know you over this past bit. And the book is Fast Tracks and Dark Deals: How Sport Became Business and Business Became Sport, out wherever you can get it. It is just, as I said at the intro, it's just jammed with all kinds of great stories. So we appreciate you sharing a little time with us today, Michael.
Well, David, Tim, has been great chatting to you. Maybe once you finish going through all of the stories, we can come back and I can do another round on the KGB, the CIA, and not to forget Mossad is in there as well.
We would love to have you back.
Yeah, that would be great. And we do have to tell you, because Terence shared some pretty unbelievable stories when we had him on about Putin and that whole experience as well.
Yeah, he's served time on that front.
All right, listen, we'll let you get back to the slopes if that's where you're headed
now.
I
got a call now with Italy. And
all right.
All right, super. Take care.
Take care. Tim, that was a fascinating discussion. So great to get someone like Michael Payne, who's been in so many different rooms and part of so many big parts of the sports industry. So make sure you check out his book, Fast Tracks and Dark Deals, when you can, because if you're into the sports business, you'll find it quite fascinating. So now is the time that we take a little peek ahead, offer shout outs, any other miscellaneous piece that we may have neglected hitting early on. Tim, what do you have your eye on?
So 2 things. Number one, today's a day of lists for me for some reason. But Army-Navy game this weekend, I still find that game fascinating to watch. It embodies everything that's really pure and authentic around college football. These guys are going to be serving their country after playing for their respective academies. I just love watching the game. And if you ever get a chance to go to one of the games, it is a great on-site experience as well. The second thing that I'm watching is, and Michael talked about the complexity of putting on the games in Milano Cortina, but specifically I want to talk about what's going on, the situation with the ice rink. Apparently it is several feet shorter than a regulation rink and only slightly wider. That has raised concerns among the players who are supposed to participate in the Olympic hockey tournament, specifically the NHL players. The term I heard used today is it's close to a disaster. So I don't know what they will do if they cannot rectify that situation between now and the opening ceremonies, which are, less than 2 months away. So that's something I'm certainly keeping an eye on as well. What about yourself?
Yeah, for close to a disaster, sounds like a disaster. I'd say, I think if you're in proximity to disaster. What am I watching? This NASCAR story that we've talked about on many of the last few shows is probably going to go longer than the 2 weeks that the judge hoped. I think there's going to be massive fallout. I think there's the potential, if they don't settle, and it seems like everybody's a bit dug in, there are going to be people that are not working in NASCAR any longer, and I think that the model could shift. There have been so many gauntlets thrown down, and like every testimony seems quite dramatic. Like this is going to be a movie someday. I mean, from our standpoint, it's kind of fun to follow, but man, it's there's going to be some fallout on this, I think. The other news, of course, is that Netflix had agreed to acquire Warner Brothers Discovery, and but leaving out the cable stations that would be the sports. Then Paramount comes in, offers a higher bid with funding from sovereign wealth funds from the Middle East and others, and that would include the whole package. So now that's all up in arms. And I bring that up because it will factor into the way we stream sports, the way we view sports, and so forth. So this ends up being an important one and a story to follow, I think, over the next few weeks as it kind of winds its way through. I don't know if you wanted to add anything on that, since it's...
No, your two stories are very compelling.
Thank you. I think we'll go ahead and bring this to a close because it's already been a jam show. There's no doubt about it. So that is it for the week. We will be back next week for our final show of 2025, which was a record-setting fourth season, mind you,
wow,
in terms of number of shows. So thank you again to Michael Payne for joining us from Switzerland, as it turns out, enjoying some time there and doing a lot of media interviews. Tim, thank you, as always, for great and fun discussions. And, of course, our listeners, we appreciate everything. Hit us up on LinkedIn, on Spotify, YouTube, or just by going to DP and McGhee. Sure, the quantity of our content probably outpaces the quality, but hey, we're working on that. So until next time, I'm DP, he's McGhee, and we'll talk soon.